Every father knows the weight of watching his child go without, and Tom Granger felt that burden every single day. The widowed mechanic could barely keep the lights on, let alone give his teenage daughter the life she deserved. Deep in the Montana forest, while searching for car parts to sell, Tom discovers an abandoned luxury sedan covered in decades of rust and vines. When he opens the door, he finds a briefcase and a crumbling journal from 1978. The journal belongs to a man who vanished without a trace, and it contains something extraordinary: coordinates and notes about $74 million hidden away by a corporate whistleblower. As Tom follows the dangerous clues, he realizes powerful people buried these secrets for a reason. Finding the money could save his family, but staying alive to spend it might cost him everything. What happens when a desperate father stumbles upon a fortune that others would kill to keep hidden? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wrench slipped from Tom Granger's oil-stained fingers as the phone rang for the fourth time that morning. He knew without looking at the caller ID that it would be another creditor, another voice demanding payment he simply didn't have. The small garage that had once been his pride, Granger's Auto Repair, now felt more like a tomb filled with the ghosts of better times. Tom wiped his hands on a rag that had seen too many years of service and glanced around the workshop that his father had built in 1962. The concrete floors bore permanent stains from decades of automotive work, and the pegboard walls still held the same tools his old man had organized with military precision. But where once there had been 3 full bays bustling with customers' cars, now only one vehicle sat waiting: Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick that she couldn't afford to fix and he couldn't afford to turn away. The morning light filtering through the dusty windows illuminated more problems than solutions. The hydraulic lift in Bay 2 had been broken for 8 months, its repair estimate sitting in the same drawer as a dozen other bills he couldn't pay. The compressor wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and half the fluorescent lights had burned out, leaving pools of shadow across the workspace. Tom answered the phone on the 5th ring. "Granger's Auto." "Mr. Granger, this is Rebecca from Mountain Valley Electric. Your account is now 67 days past due. We need to discuss immediate payment arrangements, or we'll have no choice but to disconnect service." "I understand, Rebecca. Can I call you back this afternoon? I'm expecting payment from a customer today." The lie came easier than it should have. Mrs. Henderson had already told him she couldn't pay until her Social Security check arrived next week. After hanging up, Tom sat heavily on the rolling stool beside his workbench and looked at the framed photograph that had watched over his work for the past 3 years. Anna smiled back at him, her auburn hair catching sunlight from a long-ago picnic, her green eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that cancer had slowly dimmed until it disappeared entirely. Next to her in the frame stood Sarah, then 13 and still believing her father could fix anything that broke. Now Sarah was 16, and the distance between them seemed to grow wider each day. She had Anna's eyes, but Tom's stubborn chin, and lately she'd been using both to express her frustration with their circumstances. The conversation at breakfast had been particularly difficult. "Dad, the guidance counselor wants to schedule a meeting about college applications," Sarah had said, not looking up from her cereal. "She says I need to start thinking about financial aid." Tom had nodded, spreading peanut butter on toast with the careful attention of a man trying not to think about college tuition. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart." "Will we?" The question had been quiet but pointed. "Because Jenny's dad already has her college fund set up, and Maria's family is looking at out-of-state schools. I'm just wondering if I should be realistic about community college, or maybe just getting a job after graduation." The resignation in her voice had cut deeper than any creditor's threat. Sarah was brilliant. Anna had always said she got the best of both parents' intelligence, but brilliance didn't pay for textbooks or dorm rooms or the 1,000 other expenses that stood between his daughter and her dreams. Tom pushed those thoughts aside and returned to Mrs. Henderson's Buick. The carburetor needed rebuilding, but she'd asked for the cheapest possible fix. He'd end up losing money on the job, but the alternative was watching an elderly woman struggle with an unreliable car through another Montana winter. The front bell chimed, and Tom looked up to see Jack Morrison walking through the door. Jack owned the hardware store 2 blocks down Main Street and had been Tom's friend since high school. Unlike Tom, Jack had managed to keep his business afloat through the economic downturns that had claimed 3 other shops on their street in the past 2 years. "Morning, Tom." Jack's greeting carried the careful tone of a man who'd heard the rumors about unpaid bills and disconnection notices. "How's business?" "Can't complain." Tom straightened up, instinctively hiding the worry that seemed to live permanently in his shoulders these days. "What brings you by?" "Well, I've got a proposition for you." Jack leaned against the workbench, his expression serious. "You know the old Patterson place up on Ridge Road? The family's finally decided to sell, and they want to clear out all the junk first. There's at least 3 old cars up there, maybe more. Probably nothing worth restoring, but the parts might have value." Tom felt a familiar flutter of hope mixed with caution. Salvaging parts from abandoned vehicles had become a necessity rather than a choice. The money wasn't great, but it helped keep the lights on. "What's the deal?" "They want them gone by the weekend. You can have whatever you can haul away for free, but you've got to take it all, no cherry-picking the good stuff and leaving the rest." "Where exactly is this place?" "About 20 miles north, up past Miller's Creek. It's pretty remote. The Patterson family used it as a hunting cabin back in the day. There's an old logging road that'll get you most of the way there, but you'll need to hike in the last mile or so." Tom calculated the cost of gas against the potential return on salvageable parts. It was a gamble, but he was running out of safer options. "I'll take a look tomorrow morning." "Good man." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "And Tom, I know things have been tight. If you need anything." "I appreciate it, Jack, but we're managing fine." Jack nodded, understanding the pride that made men like Tom refuse help, even when they desperately needed it. After his friend left, Tom returned to the Buick with renewed focus. The carburetor rebuild would have to wait until he could afford the parts, but he could at least clean the existing components and adjust the timing. The afternoon brought 2 more phone calls, one from the bank regarding his mortgage and another from Sarah's school about an overdue payment for her chemistry lab fee. Each conversation required the same careful balance of promises and delays, the same assurances that payment would come soon. At 5:30, Tom cleaned his tools and locked up the shop. The walk home took him past the remains of Main Street's better days. The empty storefront where Patterson's Five and Dime had operated for 40 years. The boarded windows of what had once been the town's only restaurant, and the faded signs of businesses that had closed when the lumber mill shut down 5 years ago. Their house sat on Elm Street, a modest 2-story that Anna had painted yellow the spring before she got sick. The color had faded to something closer to cream, and the front porch sagged slightly where the support beam had settled, but it was home. The mortgage was current, barely, and Tom intended to keep it that way. Sarah was at the kitchen table when he walked in, textbooks spread around her like the fortifications of someone preparing for siege. She looked up from her calculus homework with an expression that reminded him painfully of Anna. "How was school?" Tom asked, opening the refrigerator to survey their limited dinner options. "Fine. Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if I'm planning to take AP Physics next year. She thinks I should." Tom found lunch meat that was still good for another day or 2 and began making sandwiches. "What do you think?" "I think AP classes cost money for the exams, and college applications cost money, and college costs money, and maybe I should just focus on graduating and getting a job." The bitterness in her voice made Tom's hands pause in their work. When he turned around, Sarah was staring at her homework with the kind of fierce concentration that meant she was fighting tears. "Sarah, it's okay, Dad. I get it. Things are tough right now. Things will get better. Will they?" She looked up at him with Anna's eyes, and Anna's direct way of asking uncomfortable questions. "Because, from where I sit, it looks like they're getting worse. The phone rings all day, you barely eat, and you're talking about driving 20 miles into the forest to look for car parts. That doesn't sound like things getting better." "Some." Tom sat down across from her at the table that Anna had refinished the year Sarah started middle school. "Your mother and I went through tough times too, you know. Right after we got married, I was working 3 jobs, trying to keep the garage going. There were nights when we ate pancakes for dinner because it was all we could afford. But you got through it. We did, together, and we'll get through this too." Sarah studied his face with the kind of intensity that made him feel transparent. "Promise me something, Dad." "What's that?" "Promise me you won't do anything dangerous or stupid trying to fix our problems. I'd rather be poor with a father than rich without one." The words hit him like a physical blow. Tom reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "I promise I'll be careful, but I also promise I'll do whatever it takes to give you the future you deserve." That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Tom sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. No matter how he rearranged the numbers, they never added up to enough. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, Sarah's school fees were mounting, and winter was coming with its promise of higher heating costs. He thought about Jack's offer and the abandoned cars waiting in the forest. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than no plan at all. Tomorrow, he would drive into the woods, salvage what he could, and hope that somewhere among the rust and ruin he might find enough value to buy himself a little more time. Outside, the Montana wind rattled the windows with the promise of an early winter. Tom turned off the lights and headed upstairs, unaware that 20 miles north, deep in a forest where few men had walked in decades, a rusted luxury sedan waited beneath a canopy of ancient pines, holding secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about hope, danger, and the lengths a father would go to protect his daughter's future. The morning air bit at Tom's face as he loaded his truck with salvage equipment. The October sky was the color of old pewter, promising snow before the week was out. He'd left Sarah a note explaining he'd be back by evening, along with $20 for pizza money he couldn't afford to spend, but couldn't bear not to leave. The drive to the Patterson place took him through increasingly remote country. Paved road gave way to gravel, then to the rutted logging trail Jack had described. Pine trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the truck's roof like skeletal fingers. After 40 minutes of careful driving, the trail became impassable for vehicles. Tom parked and shouldered his pack, filled with basic tools and a portable winch. The hike into the property took him deeper into wilderness than he'd ventured in years. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of pine needles under his boots and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. He found the first 2 cars exactly where Jack had said they'd be, a rusted pickup from the 1960s and what had once been a sedan, both stripped by time and weather. Neither offered much of value, but Tom dutifully catalogued their potential parts, knowing he'd need to return with a trailer to haul anything substantial. It was pure chance that led him deeper into the woods. Following what might have been an old deer path, Tom pushed through a stand of aspens whose golden leaves whispered secrets in the wind. That's when he saw it, a flash of chrome buried beneath decades of forest growth. The car was a luxury sedan, probably German from the late 1970s, though the make and model were obscured by rust and the embrace of nature. Vines had claimed the windshield, and small trees grew through what had once been the engine compartment. It sat in a natural depression, hidden from casual view, as if it had been deliberately concealed. Tom approached cautiously. Something about the car's position felt intentional, purposeful. This wasn't an abandoned vehicle left by joyriders or dumped by someone avoiding disposal fees. This car had been hidden. The driver's side door resisted his efforts, its hinges frozen by decades of weather and neglect. When it finally gave way with a screech of protest, Tom found himself looking into a time capsule. The interior had been partially protected from the elements, and while damaged by moisture and small animals, it remained largely intact. On the passenger seat sat a leather briefcase, its surface cracked but structurally sound. Next to it lay a journal bound in oiled leather, its pages yellow but readable. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the journal, not from cold, but from the sudden certainty that he was about to discover something significant. The first page bore an inscription in careful handwriting: "The property of Marcus Webb, 1978. If found, please deliver to the FBI Field Office, Great Falls, Montana." Tom's heart began to race. He flipped through the pages, finding entry after entry in the same careful script. Dates, locations, names he didn't recognize, and numbers, lots of numbers. Financial figures, account numbers, coordinates. The entries spanned several months in 1978, ending abruptly on October 15th. One passage caught his attention. "They know I've been copying the files. Henderson from security has been asking questions about my access hours. I've gathered enough evidence to prove the embezzlement goes all the way to the board level, but I need more time to document the money trail. If something happens to me, the evidence is hidden at these coordinates." A series of numbers followed. Tom found himself holding his breath as he read further. Marcus Webb had been an accountant, apparently working for some kind of corporation. The journal detailed systematic theft on a massive scale, money being moved through shell companies, false invoices, fabricated contracts. The amounts were staggering. Webb had documented the theft of over $74 million. The final entry sent chills through Tom's body. "I know they're planning to silence me. I've seen what happened to Richardson when he got too close to the truth. But I won't run, and I won't be silenced. If I disappear, if something happens to me, this journal and the evidence I've gathered will speak for me. The money is hidden where they'll never find it, and someday someone will make them pay for their crimes." Tom sat back in the truck's driver's seat, journal in his lap, mind racing. Marcus Webb had vanished in 1978, taking with him evidence of a massive corporate theft. But he'd left a trail, coordinates, locations, instructions for someone brave enough or desperate enough to follow them. The briefcase drew his attention next. Its locks had corroded, and Tom was able to pry them open with his multi-tool. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were documents: corporate letterhead from Meridian Industries, financial statements, copies of contracts, and most intriguingly, a map of Montana with several locations marked in red ink. One of the marked locations was less than 50 miles from where Tom sat. Another was near Great Falls, about 2 hours' drive north. A third marked spot sat in what appeared to be mountainous country near the Canadian border. Each location was marked with coordinates and a cryptic symbol, a small drawing of what looked like a mining claim marker. Tom's hands shook as he examined a photograph tucked into the briefcase's side pocket. It showed a man in his 30s, wearing a suit and tie, standing next to a car identical to the one Tom now sat in. On the back, someone had written, "Marcus Webb, June 1978, in the same handwriting as the journal. The implications hit Tom like a physical blow. This wasn't just some abandoned car or forgotten belongings. This was evidence of a crime, and possibly the key to a fortune that had been hidden for over 4 decades. Marcus Webb had been murdered. Tom was certain of that now, but before he died, he'd hidden evidence and money in locations that no one had found. The rational part of Tom's mind urged caution. This was dangerous territory, involving people who had killed before and might kill again. But another part of his mind, the part that had listened to creditors' threats and watched his daughter's dreams shrink to fit their circumstances, whispered different advice. $74 million. Even a fraction of that amount would solve every problem Tom faced. Sarah could go to any college she wanted. The garage could be rebuilt, modernized, made profitable again. They could honor Anna's memory by living the life she'd wanted for their family. Tom photographed every page of the journal with his phone, then carefully returned it to the car along with the briefcase. Whatever he decided to do next, he needed time to think, to plan, to understand the full scope of what Marcus Webb had left behind. The hike back to his truck felt different than the journey in. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every sound carried potential threat. Tom found himself checking over his shoulder repeatedly, though he couldn't have said what he expected to see. As he drove home through the gathering dusk, Tom's mind churned with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. Marcus Webb had risked everything to expose corruption and had paid with his life. But his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. It had been waiting 46 years for someone exactly like Tom to find it. Someone desperate enough to take the risk. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Someone who understood that sometimes, when the system fails you, you have to make your own justice. The journal's pages were burned into Tom's memory, but one passage stood out above all others. Money hidden where they'll never find it. Marcus Webb had died protecting that secret, but he'd also left a map for whoever was brave enough to follow it. Tom pulled into his driveway as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, each one catching the streetlight like tiny fragments of hope. Inside, Sarah would be waiting with homework and questions about his day. He would tell her he'd found some promising salvage, which was true enough. What he wouldn't tell her, not yet, was that he'd also found something that could change their lives forever if it didn't get them killed first. Tom spent the night staring at his bedroom ceiling, Marcus Webb's journal entries playing through his mind like scenes from a movie he couldn't turn off. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the coordinates, the financial figures, the desperate final words of a man who died trying to expose the truth. By morning, he'd made a decision that both terrified and energized him. He would research Marcus Webb and Meridian Industries carefully and quietly before taking any further action. If Webb's story proved legitimate, Tom would consider following the trail he'd left behind. The first step was the town library. Tom hadn't been there since Sarah's elementary school years, when Anna would take them for story time on Saturday mornings. Now the building felt too quiet, too empty, a relic of a time when information wasn't instantly available on smartphones. Margaret Chen, the head librarian, remembered Tom from those happier days. "I haven't seen you in years," she said warmly. "How's Sarah doing?" "She's doing well. Thinking about college applications." The words carried their familiar weight of worry. "She's such a bright girl. I'm sure she'll have her pick of schools." Margaret's smile faltered slightly, perhaps remembering the rumors about Tom's financial troubles. "What can I help you with today?" "I'm doing some research on a local company from the late 1970s, Meridian Industries. I'm trying to find newspaper articles or records from that period." Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "Meridian Industries. That name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Let me check our archives." She led Tom to a corner of the library where microfilm readers sat like mechanical relics from another era. "We have the local paper on microfilm going back to 1950, she explained, pulling out boxes marked with dates. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Anything from 1978, maybe 1979. There might have been some kind of business scandal or investigation." Margaret helped him load the first reel, and Tom began the tedious process of scrolling through months of local news. After an hour of reading about high school football games, church socials, and county fair results, he found it. The headline jumped out at him from the October 23rd, 1978 edition, "Local Man Missing After Corporate Investigation." The article was brief but damning. Marcus Webb, 34, an accountant with Meridian Industries, has been reported missing by his employer after failing to report to work for 3 consecutive days. Webb's supervisor, Helena Cross, stated that Webb had been cooperating with a company audit of accounting discrepancies discovered earlier this month. Police report that Webb's car and personal belongings are missing from his apartment, suggesting he may have left the area voluntarily. However, family members express concern, stating that Webb had made no indication of plans to travel. The investigation into financial irregularities at Meridian Industries continues. Tom's blood ran cold. Helena Cross. The name appeared several times in Webb's journal, always in the context of suspicion and danger. But the article presented her as Webb's supervisor, someone concerned about his disappearance. Tom made a note to search for more information about her. The next relevant article appeared 2 weeks later. Missing man's investigation closed. This piece was even shorter. Great Falls Police have closed the investigation into the disappearance of Marcus Webb, citing lack of evidence of foul play. Webb's supervisor at Meridian Industries, Helena Cross, released a statement indicating that the company's internal audit found minor accounting errors but no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Marcus was under considerable stress from the investigation, Cross stated. We believe he chose to start fresh somewhere else, which is his right as an adult. Webb's family could not be reached for comment. Tom sat back, processing the information. The official story painted Webb as a man who'd fled under pressure, guilty of nothing more than sloppy bookkeeping. But Webb's journal told a different story entirely, one of systematic theft, cover-ups, and murder. He found Webb's corporate ID badge in his jacket pocket, where he'd placed it after discovering it wedged between the car's seats. The badge showed a younger version of the man from the photograph, wearing the same serious expression. But more importantly, it confirmed Webb's position at Meridian Industries and his access to the company's financial records. The badge was corporate standard for the era, a simple plastic rectangle with Webb's photo, name, and employee number. But Tom noticed something interesting. A small hole punched through the corner, as if it had been attached to something else. In Webb's journal, he'd mentioned keeping his badge on a retractable chain, along with keys to filing cabinets and safes. Tom photographed the badge and the relevant newspaper articles, then began searching for more recent information about Helena Cross and Meridian Industries. What he found painted a picture that made his suspicions seem understated rather than paranoid. Meridian Industries had been acquired by a larger corporation in 1980, just 2 years after Webb's disappearance. Helena Cross had risen through the ranks of the acquiring company, eventually becoming a senior partner at Cross, Hoffman, SC8, a corporate law firm specializing in crisis management and reputation protection. Tom found Cross's professional biography on her law firm's website. The photograph showed a woman in her 70s, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of wielding power. Her credentials were impressive. Harvard Law, 30 years of corporate litigation, specializing in cases involving complex financial disputes and regulatory challenges. The biography mentioned her early career at Meridian Industries, but described it as gaining valuable experience in corporate governance during a period of organizational transition. No mention of missing accountants or financial investigations. Tom spent another hour researching Cross's more recent work. Her firm represented major corporations in cases involving environmental lawsuits, regulatory violations, and white-collar crime allegations. She was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of lawyer you hired when you needed problems to disappear quietly and permanently. The implications were becoming clearer and more frightening. Webb hadn't been investigating minor accounting errors. He'd uncovered a major embezzlement scheme. When he'd gotten too close to the truth, he'd been eliminated. The official investigation had been closed quickly, probably through the influence of the same people who'd ordered his death. And Helena Cross, Webb's supposed supervisor, and the woman who'd spoken so sympathetically to the press about his disappearance, had built a career on making inconvenient truths vanish. Tom left the library with more questions than answers, but also with a growing certainty that Marcus Webb's story was genuine. The journal wasn't the ravings of a paranoid man, it was the documented evidence of corporate crime on a massive scale. As he drove home, Tom noticed a dark sedan that seemed to be maintaining the same distance behind him. When he turned left onto Main Street, the sedan turned left. When he slowed to check his mirrors, the sedan slowed as well. By the time Tom reached his garage, his heart was pounding with more than just physical exertion. He pulled into his usual parking spot and waited. The sedan drove past without slowing, its windows tinted too dark to see the driver clearly. But Tom caught a glimpse of the license plate. It wasn't local. Inside the garage, Tom tried to focus on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, but his hands shook as he worked. The carburetor rebuild that should have taken 2 hours stretched into 4, as Tom found himself stopping frequently to listen for approaching footsteps or the sound of car doors closing. When Sarah arrived after school, she immediately noticed his distraction. "Dad, you're jumpy as a cat today. What's wrong?" Tom forced a smile. "Just thinking about some business decisions. Nothing for you to worry about." But Sarah had her mother's intuition for reading people's emotional states. "This is about your salvage trip yesterday, isn't it? You've been acting strange ever since you got home. I found some interesting items, that's all. I'm trying to figure out what they might be worth." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't entirely the truth either. The items Tom had found were potentially worth far more than he'd ever imagined, but the cost of claiming them might be higher than he was prepared to pay. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Tom sat at his kitchen table with Webb's journal photographs spread before him. He studied the coordinates again, comparing them to online maps and trying to understand Webb's organizational system. One thing became clear: Webb had been methodical in his planning. The locations weren't random hiding spots, but carefully chosen sites that would be difficult to find and harder to access. Webb had anticipated that someone would eventually discover his car and follow his trail, but he'd made sure that journey would require commitment, courage, and considerable risk. Tom traced the route to the first location with his finger. It was in the mountains east of town, accessible only by hiking trails that would be treacherous in winter weather. The second location was even more remote, near an abandoned mining operation that had been closed since the 1960s. As he studied the maps, Tom became aware of a sound he hadn't noticed before, a car engine idling somewhere on his street. He turned off the kitchen lights and moved to the front window, peering carefully through the curtains. The same dark sedan sat 3 houses down, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cold night air. As Tom watched, the driver's door opened, and a figure emerged, tall, wearing dark clothing, moving with the purposeful stride of someone conducting surveillance rather than making a casual visit. Tom's blood turned to ice water. Someone was watching his house. Someone knew about his research, his discovery, his growing involvement in Marcus Webb's 46-year-old mystery. He had a choice to make, and he had to make it quickly. He could abandon Webb's trail, return the journal and briefcase to their hiding place, and hope that whoever was watching him would lose interest and disappear. Or he could accept that he'd already crossed a line from which there was no safe return, and commit fully to following Marcus Webb's dangerous legacy wherever it might lead. Outside, the figure returned to the sedan, which drove away with the quiet efficiency of a predator that had learned what it came to discover. Tom remained at the window long after the taillights disappeared, knowing that his decision had already been made the moment he'd opened that car door in the forest. Tomorrow, he would begin following Marcus Webb's coordinates. Tonight, he would make sure Sarah was safe, because the game he'd decided to play had rules he didn't understand and stakes he was only beginning to comprehend. Tom woke before dawn, his sleep fractured by dreams of dark sedans and faceless watchers. The vintage compass he'd found in Webb's glove compartment sat on his nightstand, its brass surface reflecting the first pale light of morning. The instrument was beautifully crafted, clearly expensive, with Marcus Webb's initials engraved on the back along with a date. M.W. June 1978. Truth will prevail. Sarah was still sleeping when Tom quietly prepared for another expedition. This time, he packed more carefully water, food, basic first aid supplies, and a detailed topographic map of the area around Webb's first coordinates. The compass would guide him to whatever Webb had hidden in the mountains 46 years ago. The drive took him even further from civilization than his previous journey. The coordinates led to a region of national forest where logging roads gave way to hiking trails that hadn't been maintained in decades. Tom parked his truck at an abandoned forestry station and began the 3-mile hike to Webb's marked location. The compass proved invaluable as the trail became increasingly difficult to follow. Webb had chosen his hiding places well remote enough to avoid casual discovery, but accessible to someone determined and prepared. The morning air was crisp, and Tom's breath formed clouds as he climbed steadily upward through stands of pine and aspen. After 2 hours of hiking, Tom reached the coordinates. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just another patch of mountain forest, indistinguishable from thousands of others. But Webb's compass pointed him toward a cluster of granite boulders that formed a natural shelter. Behind the largest boulder, partially concealed by decades of fallen leaves and forest debris, Tom found what he was looking for. A metal sign marking an abandoned mining claim. The sign was old, dating from the 1920s, but someone had recently disturbed the area around it. Tom cleared away the accumulated debris and discovered a small cavity beneath the sign's base. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth and sealed in a metal container, was another journal. This one focused entirely on the locations where Webb had hidden evidence and money. The second journal was more detailed than the first, containing maps, photographs, and precise instructions for accessing Webb's hidden caches. Each location was described in careful detail, along with warnings about potential dangers and suggestions for remaining undetected. But it was the photographs that made Tom's hands tremble. They showed bundles of cash, stacks of documents, and in one particularly striking image, a safe deposit box key lying next to what appeared to be bearer bonds worth millions of dollars. Webb had been thorough in his preparations. The journal described a network of hiding places across Montana, each containing part of the evidence he'd gathered and a portion of the money he'd managed to recover. The total, according to Webb's careful accounting, came to just over $74 million, exactly the amount mentioned in his original journal. Tom photographed every page, then carefully returned the journal to its hiding place. Whatever decision he made about pursuing Webb's legacy, he wanted to ensure the evidence remained intact for future investigators. The hike back to his truck gave him time to process what he'd learned. Webb hadn't just documented corporate theft, he'd actually recovered most of the stolen money and hidden it where only the most dedicated searcher could find it. The man had been preparing for his own death, leaving a trail that would eventually lead to justice, even if he couldn't live to see it delivered. But Tom also understood that following that trail would put him in the crosshairs of people who had already killed to protect their secrets. Helena Cross was still alive, still powerful, still capable of making problems disappear. If she learned about Tom's discoveries, she wouldn't hesitate to eliminate another inconvenient truth-seeker. Tom was so absorbed in these thoughts that he almost missed the sound of an approaching vehicle. The engine noise came from the direction of his truck, growing steadily louder. Tom left the trail and moved into the cover of the trees, watching as a black SUV pulled up beside his pickup. 2 men emerged from the SUV, both wearing dark suits that looked entirely inappropriate for wilderness hiking. They moved with the careful precision of professionals, examining Tom's truck while speaking in voices too low for him to overhear. One of the men produced a device that he used to scan the truck's interior, while the other took photographs of the license plate and surrounding area. After several minutes, they returned to their vehicle and drove away, leaving no sign of their presence except tire tracks in the soft earth. Tom waited another hour before approaching his truck, checking carefully for any signs of tampering. The vehicle appeared undisturbed, but the message was clear. He was being watched, tracked, and assessed by people with resources and capabilities he could only guess at. The drive home was an exercise in controlled paranoia. Tom varied his route, made unexpected turns, and used his mirrors constantly to check for surveillance. The dark sedan from the previous night didn't reappear, but Tom spotted at least 2 other vehicles that seemed to maintain suspicious distances behind him. Sarah was waiting when he arrived home, her expression a mixture of worry and frustration that reminded him painfully of her mother. "Dad, we need to talk." Tom tried to project casual confidence as he hung up his jacket. "What's on your mind, sweetheart? You've been acting strange for 2 days now. You're jumpy, distracted, and you keep looking over your shoulder like you're expecting someone to follow you. And don't tell me it's nothing, because I can see it in your eyes." Tom sat down at the kitchen table, struck by how much his daughter had matured in the months since Anna's death. She was no longer the child who accepted simple explanations and reassurances. She was becoming a young woman who demanded honesty, especially from the people she loved. "You're right," he admitted. "I am distracted. I found something yesterday that I'm trying to understand, and it's more complicated than I expected." "What kind of something?" Tom chose his words carefully. "Historical documents, evidence of something that happened a long time ago. I'm trying to decide whether to pursue it further. Is it dangerous?" The directness of the question caught Tom off guard. Sarah was looking at him with the kind of intensity that suggested she already knew the answer. "It might be. That's why I'm being cautious." "Dad, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't take any risks that could leave me alone. I've already lost Mom. I can't lose you too." The pain in her voice cut through Tom's uncertainty like a blade. He reached across the table and took her hands in his. "I promise I'll be careful, and I promise I'll talk to you before I make any major decisions. But Sarah, what if I told you I'd found something that could solve all our problems? Something that could pay for your college, save the garage, give us the life your mother wanted for us?" Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "I'd say that things that sound too good to be true usually are. And I'd remind you that we've survived this long by being smart and careful, not by taking big risks." Her wisdom humbled him. At 16, Sarah already understood lessons that had taken Tom decades to learn. But she also didn't understand the weight of watching creditors circle like vultures, or the crushing responsibility of failing to provide for the people you loved most. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Tom made a decision. He would follow Webb's trail to its conclusion, but he would do it with full knowledge of the risks involved. If Helena Cross and her associates wanted to stop him, they would have to work for it. Tom spent hours studying the coordinates and instructions from Webb's second journal. The next location was closer to town, hidden in an area that had once been used for logging operations. According to Webb's notes, this site contained the most important evidence documentation that would prove the embezzlement conspiracy and identify all the participants. But Webb had also left warnings about this location. It was more accessible than the mountain site, which meant it was also more vulnerable to discovery. Webb had taken extra precautions, including what he cryptically referred to as deterrents for unauthorized visitors. As Tom prepared for another expedition, he found himself thinking about Marcus Webb's final days. The man had known he was going to die, had prepared for his own murder with the methodical precision of someone who understood the stakes involved. Webb had been willing to sacrifice his life to ensure the truth eventually emerged. Tom wondered if he had that kind of courage. The answer would determine not just his own fate, but the future of everyone he cared about. Outside, the wind rattled the windows of the house. Anna had painted yellow, And somewhere in the darkness, Tom was certain. Patient watchers waited to see what choice a desperate father would make when confronted with the opportunity to change everything or lose it all. The safety deposit box key was smaller than Tom had expected, its brass surface worn smooth by decades of handling. He found it exactly where Webb's journal had indicated, secured inside a waterproof container buried beneath a distinctive rock formation near the old logging site. Along with the key was a piece of paper bearing the name of a bank in Great Falls and a box number, 847. Tom stared at the key in his palm, understanding that holding it represented a point of no return. Whatever was in that safety deposit box had been important enough for Marcus Webb to die protecting. Opening it would connect Tom irrevocably to a conspiracy that had already claimed at least one life. The drive to Great Falls took 2 hours, during which Tom found himself checking his mirrors constantly. The surveillance had become more obvious since his mountain expedition, different vehicles, but always maintaining the same careful distance. His watchers wanted him to know he was being monitored. First National Bank of Great Falls was an imposing brick building that had weathered decades of Montana winters with stubborn dignity. Tom parked across the street and spent several minutes studying the building and surrounding area. If Webb's enemies had been watching the bank for 46 years, Tom needed to spot them before they spotted him. He saw nothing obviously suspicious, but that didn't mean he was safe. Tom crossed the street and entered the bank with the casual confidence of a man conducting routine business. The safe deposit box area was supervised by a woman in her 50s whose nameplate read Carol Martinez, Customer Service Manager. Tom approached her desk with Webb's key and the identification documents he'd prepared. "I'd like to access my safety deposit box," Tom said, handing her the key. Carol examined the key and consulted her computer system. "Box 847. I'll need to see 2 forms of identification, please." Tom handed her his driver's license and credit card, hoping the bank's records wouldn't reveal the true identity of the box's renter. Carol compared his information to something on her screen, then frowned slightly. "Mr. Granger, our records show this box was rented in 1978 by someone else. The rental fees have been paid automatically through a trust fund, but we've never had contact with the original renter or his designated successors." Tom's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm representing the estate. The original renter died several years ago, and I've been authorized to access the box contents." It was a desperate improvisation, but Carol seemed to accept it. Banks dealt with estate issues regularly, and Tom's mature appearance and serious demeanor suggested legitimate business rather than criminal intent. "I'll need to verify that with my supervisor," Carol said. "Could you wait here for a moment?" Tom nodded, trying to appear patient while his mind raced through contingency plans. If the bank required extensive documentation, he would have to abandon this avenue and rely solely on the evidence he'd already gathered. Carol returned after several minutes with an older man wearing an expensive suit and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Granger, I'm Robert Chen, the bank manager. Carol tells me you're here about box 847. That's quite a coincidence. We've had another inquiry about that box recently." Tom felt ice water in his veins. "Another inquiry?" "Yes, just yesterday. A woman representing a law firm called to ask about the box's status. She seemed very interested in whether anyone had accessed it recently." Chen studied Tom's face carefully. "She mentioned that the box might contain materials relevant to an ongoing legal matter." Helena Cross. It had to be. Somehow, she'd learned about Tom's investigation and was moving to intercept whatever Webb had left behind. "What did you tell her?" Tom asked. "Bank policy prohibits us from discussing customer information with unauthorized parties," Chen replied. "But it does seem unusual that 2 people would show interest in a box that's been dormant for over 40 years. Tom realized he had seconds to make a crucial decision. He could retreat, claim confusion about the box number, and hope to escape before Cross's people arrived. Or he could push forward, gambling that Webb's foresight had anticipated this exact scenario. "The legal matter your caller mentioned probably relates to the estate I'm settling," Tom said. The original box renter left specific instructions about who could access his materials and under what circumstances. "I have the key and the authorization. I'd like to proceed, if that's possible." Chen exchanged glances with Carol, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Carol will escort you to the viewing room. However, given the unusual circumstances, I'll need to document your visit thoroughly." The safe deposit box viewing room was small and windowless, furnished with only a table and 2 chairs. Carol used her master key in combination with Tom's to open box 847, then handed him a metal container about the size of a shoebox. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be right outside if you have any questions." Tom waited until the door closed, then lifted the container's lid with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were treasures beyond his wildest expectations. The first bundle contained bearer bonds, financial instruments that belonged to whoever possessed them, no questions asked. Tom counted carefully. 50 bonds, each worth $100,000. $5 million in negotiable securities, waiting for someone with the knowledge and courage to claim them. The second bundle was even more valuable. Detailed financial records, photographs of documents, and a complete organizational chart showing everyone involved in the Meridian Industries conspiracy. Names, amounts, dates, bank account numbers, everything needed to reconstruct the entire embezzlement scheme. But it was the third bundle that made Tom's hands shake uncontrollably. It contained a letter addressed to whoever finds this evidence and written in Marcus Webb's careful handwriting. "If you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have followed the trail I left behind. I pray that you are someone with the courage to finish what I started, because the people who killed me are still out there, still powerful, still dangerous." The evidence in this box proves that Helena Cross, Thomas Richardson, and 6 other executives at Meridian Industries embezzled over $74 million between 1975 and 1978. They killed Richardson when he threatened to confess, and they killed me when I got too close to the truth. But I didn't just document their crimes, I recovered most of the money. It's hidden in locations described in my journals, waiting for someone honest enough to use it for justice rather than personal gain. If you have found this box, you have a choice. You can take the bearer bonds and disappear, living comfortably on money stolen from pension funds and charity donations. Or you can use this evidence to expose the truth and ensure that justice is finally served. I hope you choose justice. These people destroyed lives, stole futures, and murdered anyone who threatened their scheme. They deserve to face consequences for their crimes, even if it takes 40 years. The woman who supervised their cover-up, Helena Cross, is still alive as I write this. She's young, ambitious, and ruthless. By the time you read this, she will have built her career on the foundation of our murders. Don't underestimate her. She has resources, connections, and absolutely no conscience. Be careful, be smart, but most importantly, be brave. The victims of this conspiracy deserve justice, and you may be their last hope. Marcus Webb, October 14, 1978. Tom read the letter twice, feeling the weight of Webb's expectations settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The man had died, believing someone would eventually continue his fight, had trusted that his evidence would find its way to someone willing to risk everything for justice. A soft knock at the door interrupted Tom's thoughts. Carol's voice came through the panel. "Mr. Granger, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are some people here asking about you." Tom's blood turned to ice. "What kind of people?" "They say they're from a law firm. They have identification, but they seem very insistent about speaking with you immediately. Helena Cross had found him. Somehow, despite his precautions, she'd tracked him to the bank and was moving to neutralize the threat he represented. Tom quickly photographed the most critical documents with his phone, then carefully repacked the box contents. "I'll be right out," he called, his mind racing through possible escape routes. When Tom opened the viewing room door, Carol was standing beside three people who definitely weren't typical bank customers. Two were the same dark-suited men he'd seen at the forestry station. The third was a woman in her 70s, elegantly dressed and radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of wielding power. Helena Cross in person was smaller than her photograph suggested, but her presence filled the room. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her suit clearly expensive, and her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had built her career on making difficult problems disappear. "Mr. Granger," she said, extending a manicured hand, "I'm Helena Cross from Cross, Hoffman Associates. I understand you've been conducting research into some historical matters that intersect with my client's interests." Tom shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip and the way her associates positioned themselves to block his exit routes. "I'm not sure what you mean. Please don't insult my intelligence. You've been asking questions about Meridian Industries, accessing records that have been sealed for decades. And now you're here examining materials that should have been destroyed long ago." Her smile was arctic. "My clients are prepared to be generous in exchange for your cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" Cross gestured toward the safe deposit box. "Whatever you found in there needs to be turned over to the proper authorities, meaning my firm. We represent the legitimate interests of the people involved in those long-ago events. And if I refuse?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Mr. Granger, you have a 16-year-old daughter named Sarah. She's a bright girl with a promising future ahead of her. It would be unfortunate if your poor decisions affected her opportunities." The threat was delivered with the casual precision of someone who had made similar statements many times before. Tom felt rage building in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. "Are you threatening my daughter?" "I'm simply pointing out that actions have consequences. You've stumbled into matters far beyond your understanding, involving people who have successfully protected their interests for nearly half a century. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to walk away now." Tom looked at the safety deposit box, then at Helena Cross, then at the two men who were clearly prepared to enforce whatever decision she made. Marcus Webb had died, rather than surrender to people like these. But Webb hadn't had a daughter depending on him. "I need time to think about this." Cross checked her expensive watch. "You have until tomorrow evening to make the right choice, Mr. Granger. After that, I can no longer guarantee that this situation will remain as civilized as it has been so far." She turned and walked toward the bank's exit, her associates following like well-trained hunting dogs. At the door, she paused and looked back at Tom. "Oh, and Mr. Granger, don't even consider running. We've been watching you since the day you found that car, and we'll continue watching until this matter is resolved to our satisfaction." After they left, Tom stood in the bank lobby for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Helena Cross wasn't just covering up old crimes. She was actively monitoring anyone who might threaten her carefully constructed lies. She had resources, connections, and the absolute ruthlessness that Webb had warned about. But she had also made a critical mistake. By threatening Sarah directly, Cross had transformed this from a choice between justice and safety into something much more personal. She had declared war on Tom's family, and that changed everything. Tom completed the safe deposit box procedures and left the bank, keenly aware that he was being followed. The drive home gave him time to plan, to think, to prepare for a confrontation that was no longer avoidable. Helena Cross wanted to play by rules that had kept her powerful for 46 years. But Tom had something she didn't expect. Marcus Webb's complete evidence file, the location of $74 million in hidden assets. and the desperate determination of a father who would do anything to protect his daughter's future. The game had changed, and Tom intended to make sure Helena Cross understood exactly what that meant. Tom found the coded letter exactly where Webb's journal had indicated, sealed in a waterproof container and buried beneath the ruins of an old mining cabin. The letter was written in a cipher that had taken Tom 3 days to decode, using a key Webb had cleverly embedded in the coordinates of his various hiding places. The decoded message was brief but revelatory. Final cache located at Copper Creek Mine. Shaft 3, depth 40 feet. Total recovery, 74. 847, 0. Access requires extreme caution, natural and artificial deterrents in place. Truth lies at the bottom. Justice requires courage. M.W. Tom stared at the coordinates, realizing that Marcus Webb had literally buried the truth at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft. The location was in some of the most remote wilderness in Montana, accessible only by hiking trails that would be treacherous in the best conditions and potentially deadly in winter weather. But Webb's letter also contained something else, information about Helena Cross that chilled Tom to the bone. According to Webb's final investigation, Cross hadn't just been a supervisor at Meridian Industries. She had been the architect of the entire embezzlement scheme, using her position in the legal department to create the shell companies and offshore accounts that made the theft possible. When the scheme threatened to unravel, she had personally ordered the murders of Thomas Richardson and Webb himself. More disturbing still, Webb had documented Cross's rise through the corporate world, built on a foundation of blackmail, intimidation, and carefully orchestrated cover-ups. She hadn't just survived the Meridian scandal, she had used it as a stepping stone to greater power and influence. The letter ended with a warning that proved Webb's prophetic abilities. Cross will never stop hunting for this evidence. She knows that exposure means not just financial ruin, but criminal prosecution for multiple murders. Anyone who threatens her will become a target, and she has the resources to eliminate threats permanently. Tom was reviewing Webb's detailed map of the mine location when Sarah knocked on his bedroom door. "Dad, can I come in?" Tom quickly covered the documents with a magazine. "Of course, sweetheart." Sarah entered and sat on the edge of his bed, her expression serious. "We need to talk about what's been happening." "What do you mean?" "Dad, I'm not stupid. There have been strange cars on our street for 3 days. You've been acting paranoid, jumping at every sound. And today, when I got home from school, 2 men in suits were asking Mrs. Patterson about our family." Tom's heart sank. He had tried to keep Sarah out of this, but Helena Cross was escalating the pressure by involving his daughter directly. "What did Mrs. Patterson tell them?" "Nothing, because she's not stupid either. She told them to talk to you directly if they had questions. But Dad, these aren't bill collectors or insurance salesmen. These are the kind of people who make families disappear." The maturity in Sarah's voice reminded Tom painfully of Anna. Their daughter had inherited more than her mother's intelligence. She had also developed Anna's ability to see through deception and demand honesty from the people she loved. Tom made a decision that went against every protective instinct he possessed. Sarah was already in danger, whether he told her the truth or not. At least, if she understood the situation, she could help protect herself. "You're right," he said. "I found something. And now some very dangerous people want it back." Tom spent the next hour explaining everything: Webb's journals, the evidence of corporate murder and embezzlement, Helena Cross's threats, and the location of the hidden money. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Tom finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question he'd been dreading. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Cross gave me until tomorrow evening to turn over everything I've found. If I comply, she'll probably leave us alone. If I don't, she'll kill us both to protect her secrets." Sarah finished. "Dad, you can't give her what she wants. Even if you hand over every piece of evidence, we'll still be witnesses to her crimes. She can't afford to let us live." Tom was struck by his daughter's clear-eyed assessment of their situation. Sarah understood the stakes better than he'd given her credit for. "So what do you suggest?" Sarah was quiet for another moment, then looked at him with determination that reminded him powerfully of Anna facing her cancer diagnosis. "We finish what Marcus Webb started. We get the evidence, expose the truth, and make sure Helena Cross pays for what she's done." "Sarah, it's incredibly dangerous. The mine location is remote, probably booby-trapped, and Cross's people will be watching for any move we make. Then we need to be smarter than they are." Sarah pulled out her laptop and began typing. "You said the mine is near Copper Creek, right? I can find satellite images, hiking trails, weather reports. We need to know everything before we go in." Tom watched his daughter work, feeling a mixture of pride and terror. Sarah had Anna's courage and intelligence, but she was still just 16 years old. The thought of putting her in harm's way made him physically sick. "Maybe I should do this alone," he said. Sarah looked up from her computer. "Dad, they're already targeting me. I'm safer with you than sitting here waiting for Cross's people to decide I'm a liability." She was right, and they both knew it. Helena Cross had made Sarah a target the moment she'd threatened her in the bank. The only way to protect his daughter was to end this confrontation permanently. They spent the rest of the evening planning their expedition to Copper Creek Mine. Sarah proved to be remarkably good at tactical thinking, identifying potential escape routes, emergency supplies they would need, and ways to avoid the surveillance teams that were undoubtedly monitoring their every move. "We need to leave before dawn," Sarah said, studying the topographic maps. "The trail to the mine is about 8 miles, most of it uphill. If we start early, we can reach the location and get back before dark. And if Cross's people follow us, then we make sure we're prepared for them." Sarah's smile was grim but determined. "Marcus Webb left us more than just evidence, Dad. He left us a map to justice. We owe it to him and to ourselves to see this through." That night, Tom lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling and the wind in the trees outside. Somewhere in the darkness, he knew Cross's watchers waited, patient and professional. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation that would determine not just his and Sarah's fate, but whether the truth about crimes committed nearly 50 years ago would finally see the light of day. Tom thought about Marcus Webb, alone in that forest so long ago, knowing he was going to die but determined to leave a trail that would eventually lead to justice. Webb had believed that someone like Tom would eventually find his evidence, someone desperate enough to take the risk, honest enough to seek justice rather than just personal gain. Tomorrow, Tom would discover whether Webb's faith had been justified. In the abandoned depths of Copper Creek Mine, among the shadows and secrets of decades past, a father's love for his daughter would be tested against the ruthless determination of people who had already killed to protect their lives. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the margin for error was non-existent. But Tom had something Helena Cross couldn't understand or anticipate: the fierce protectiveness of a parent who would rather die than let his child face the future alone and undefended. Marcus Webb's legacy was about to be claimed, and the reckoning that had waited 46 years was finally at hand. The identity documents Tom found in the deepest part of Webb's mine cache changed everything he thought he knew about the man whose trail he'd been following. Hidden beneath layers of oiled cloth and sealed in a military-grade waterproof container were credentials that made Tom's hands tremble as he held them. Marcus Webb hadn't been just an accountant who'd stumbled onto corporate corruption. He had been FBI Special Agent Marcus Welby, working deep undercover to investigate what the Bureau suspected was a massive organized crime operation disguised as legitimate business. The documents told a story that was far more complex and dangerous than anything Tom had imagined. Agent Welby had been inserted into Meridian Industries as part of a multi-year federal investigation into corporate money laundering, racketeering, and connections to organized crime families in Chicago and Detroit. Welby's real FBI credentials were accompanied by sealed orders from the Bureau's Organized Crime Task Force. The investigation hadn't been about simple embezzlement. It had been about exposing how criminal organizations were using legitimate corporations to wash millions of dollars in illegal profits. Helena Cross wasn't just a corrupt corporate lawyer. According to Welby's classified reports, she was a key facilitator in a network that connected Wall Street financiers, Midwest crime families, and corrupt government officials in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate and political power. Tom read through Welby's final report with growing horror. The $74 million wasn't embezzled pension funds. It was laundered money from drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and other criminal enterprises. Meridian Industries had been a front operation, and Cross had been the architect who made it all possible. But the most shocking revelation came in Welby's final communication to his FBI handlers, dated October 13, 1978, one day before his disappearance. Deep cover compromised. Cross has discovered my true identity through sources unknown. Suspect bureau infiltration at high levels. Cannot trust normal channels. Have secured evidence of entire operation including financial records, photographs, and recorded conversations, proving organized crime connections to major corporations and federal officials. Cross has ordered my elimination, but I've prepared for this contingency. Evidence hidden in multiple locations with instructions for recovery. If I disappear, assume bureau compromise and pursue alternative channels for exposure. This conspiracy extends far beyond Meridian Industries. Have documented connections to at least 12 other corporations and 6 federal agencies. The scope of corruption is unprecedented. Justice requires someone outside the system. Special Agent Marcus Welby, Badge 2847, reporting final status. Tom sat in the abandoned mine shaft, surrounded by the evidence that Welby had died protecting, understanding that he had stumbled into something far more dangerous than corporate theft. This was a conspiracy that had operated successfully for decades, protected by people with the power to eliminate federal agents and cover up their murders. But Tom also realized something else. If Welby had suspected FBI infiltration, then Helena Cross had connections inside federal law enforcement. She would know about any attempt to contact the authorities, and she would be able to neutralize threats through official channels as easily as through private ones. The mine cache contained more than just documents. Welby had hidden recording equipment, photographs of meetings between Cross and known organized crime figures, and financial records that traced the money laundering operation across dozens of states and multiple countries. One photograph in particular made Tom's blood run cold. It showed a much younger Helena Cross shaking hands with a man whose face Tom recognized from newspaper coverage of organized crime trials. In the background of the photo, barely visible, stood a figure that Tom realized with a shock was a young Robert Chen, the bank manager, who had facilitated Tom's access to the safety deposit box. The conspiracy wasn't just historical. It was active, ongoing, and had tentacles that reached into every institution Tom might have trusted for help. Tom's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Dad, something's wrong. Strange cars everywhere. Mrs. Patterson says men are asking about hiking trails. They know." Helena Cross was moving faster than Tom had anticipated. She had figured out that he was following Welby's trail to its conclusion, and she was mobilizing resources to stop him before he could expose truths that would destroy her and her associates. Tom photographed every document in Welby's cache, then carefully sealed the originals back in their containers. If something happened to him, at least the evidence would survive for someone else to find. But he also understood that he couldn't rely on traditional law enforcement or federal agencies to pursue justice. Welby's final report had mentioned alternative channels, and Tom began to understand what the agent had meant. The evidence needed to reach people who were outside the corrupted system, journalists, perhaps, or congressional investigators who hadn't been compromised. But first, Tom needed to get himself and Sarah to safety. Cross's people were closing in, and their isolated location made them vulnerable to the kind of permanent solution that had eliminated Agent Welby 46 years ago. Tom made his way out of the mine shaft, using Welby's compass to navigate the treacherous terrain. The afternoon sun was already beginning to sink toward the horizon, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. If Cross's people were monitoring the area, they would be expecting Tom to emerge from the mine with whatever he'd found. Tom's truck was parked 3 miles away, down a hiking trail that offered multiple opportunities for ambush. But Tom had spent the past week studying Welby's tactical notes, and the FBI agent had been thorough in his contingency planning. Welby had mapped multiple escape routes from each of his cache locations, including several that avoided the main trails entirely. Tom chose the most difficult route, a steep scramble through dense forest that would be nearly impossible to navigate in darkness, but would also be nearly impossible to monitor effectively. The hike took 2 hours, and Tom's lungs burned from the exertion and thin mountain air. But when he finally reached his truck, he was relieved to find it undisturbed. Either Cross's people hadn't found it, or they were waiting for him to lead them to the evidence. Tom started the engine and began the long drive back to town, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd learned. Marcus Webb had been Marcus Welby, an FBI agent who had died trying to expose a conspiracy that connected organized crime, corporate corruption, and federal agencies in a web of mutual protection and profit. Helena Cross wasn't just covering up old crimes. She was protecting an ongoing criminal enterprise that had operated successfully for nearly half a century. The stakes weren't just Tom and Sarah's lives, they were the integrity of American institutions and the rule of law itself. As Tom drove through the darkening forest, he realized that Agent Welby had been right about one thing. Justice would require someone outside the system, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain from exposing the truth. Tom Granger, failed mechanic and desperate father, was about to become something he'd never imagined, the instrument of justice that a murdered federal agent had been preparing for 46 years. But first, he had to make sure his daughter was safe. And then, he had to figure out how to take down a conspiracy that had survived for decades by eliminating anyone brave enough or foolish enough to threaten it. The game had changed again, and Tom was beginning to understand that he wasn't just playing for his family's future. He was playing for the soul of a system that claimed to value justice but had been corrupted by people who valued power more than truth. Marcus Welby's legacy was about to be claimed, and the reckoning he had died trying to achieve was finally within reach. Tom just had to survive long enough to deliver it. The microcassette recorder was ancient by modern standards, but Agent Welby's final recording was crystal clear. Tom played it for the 3rd time as he and Sarah prepared for what they both understood might be their last night in the house. Anna had painted yellow. Welby's voice carried the calm professionalism of a man who had accepted his fate. "This is Special Agent Marcus Welby, badge number 2847, recording my final report on Operation Copper Wire. The date is October 14, 1978, approximately 2,100 hours. Helena Cross has discovered my identity and ordered my elimination. The kill order came through Vincent Torino, underboss of the Chicago Martinelli family. Cross has been their primary facilitator for money laundering operations across 7 states. I have secured complete evidence of the conspiracy, including financial records, proving that over $200 million in criminal proceeds have been processed through Meridian Industries and 12 associated corporations since 1975. The operation involves federal judges, bureau supervisors, congressional staff members, and corporate executives at the highest levels. Cross operates with complete impunity because she has compromat on everyone involved. She documents every transaction, every meeting, every criminal act, then uses that information to ensure loyalty and silence. She's not just a lawyer, she's the spider at the center of the web that connects organized crime to legitimate power. I've hidden evidence at 7 locations. Anyone who finds this recording will have already located most of them. The final location contains the complete archive, everything needed to prosecute this conspiracy and expose the federal officials who have been protecting it. To whoever finds this, Helena Cross will stop at nothing to prevent exposure. She has killed federal agents, judges, journalists, and anyone else who threatened her operation. She will kill you too, unless you move faster and smarter than she anticipates. The evidence must reach people outside the corrupted system. Senator Patricia Blackwood chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee and has been investigating organized crime infiltration of federal agencies. Her staff aide, David Chen, can be trusted. He's been feeding our investigation information about congressional corruption. Act quickly. Trust no one in federal law enforcement until the evidence is secured. And remember, you're not just fighting for justice. You're fighting for the integrity of American democracy itself. This is Agent Marcus Welby, signing off. God help whoever finds this, and God help America. Tom turned off the recorder, feeling the weight of Welby's expectations and the magnitude of the conspiracy they were confronting. Helena Cross hadn't just survived the past 46 years. She had used them to build an empire of corruption that reached the highest levels of government and business. Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she'd been researching Senator Blackwood and David Chen. "Dad, I found them both. Blackwood is still chairing the Judiciary Committee, and David Chen is now her chief of staff. If Agent Welby trusted them in 1978, they might be our only hope now." Tom nodded, but his mind was focused on the immediate tactical situation. Cross's people had been escalating their surveillance throughout the day. 3 different teams had driven past their house, a helicopter had circled the area twice, and Mrs. Patterson had reported more men asking questions about the Granger family's routines and habits. "We need to assume they're going to move tonight," Tom said. "Cross can't afford to let us reach Washington with Welby's evidence." Sarah had proven remarkably adept at tactical planning over the past few days. Her youth and intelligence gave her a perspective that Tom found invaluable, especially when it came to using technology that Welby's 1978 preparations couldn't have anticipated. "I've uploaded copies of everything to encrypted cloud storage," Sarah said. "Even if they destroy the physical evidence, the digital copies will survive. I've also set up automated emails that will send the evidence to journalists, congressional staffers, and FBI field offices if we don't check in every 12 hours. Tom felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. Sarah was displaying the kind of courage and intelligence that Anna would have admired, but she shouldn't have needed to develop these skills at 16 years old. "What about our escape route?" Sarah pulled up a detailed map on her laptop screen. "I've identified 3 possible routes out of town that avoid the main roads. The best option takes us through the National Forest to a ranger station, where we can get help. From there, we can contact Senator Blackwood's office." Tom studied the route, recognizing the terrain from his recent expeditions to Welby's cache sites. It would be difficult hiking, especially in darkness, but it offered their best chance of avoiding Cross's surveillance teams. "How much time do we have?" Before Sarah could answer, Tom's phone rang. The caller ID showed Helena Cross's law firm. Tom looked at Sarah, who nodded grimly. They both understood that this call would determine the timeline for everything that followed. "Mr. Granger," Cross's voice was ice-cold professional. "I trust you've had time to consider our conversation. I'm still thinking about it." "I'm afraid your thinking time has expired. My associates are prepared to collect the materials you've discovered, along with any copies you may have made. They'll be arriving at your house within the hour." Tom felt his heart pounding, but kept his voice steady. "And if I refuse? Then you and your daughter will join Marcus Webb in whatever remote location he's been resting for the past 46 years. The choice is yours, Mr. Granger, but the outcome is predetermined." We've been protecting these interests for decades. You're not the first person who thought they could expose us, and you won't be the last to discover how wrong they were." The line went dead. Tom looked at Sarah, who was already packing essential supplies into hiking backpacks. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Less than an hour, maybe much less. She wants us to think we have time to prepare, but her people are probably already in position." Sarah shouldered her pack and picked up Agent Welby's final recording device. "Then we go now, through the back fence. The forest route will take us to the ranger station by dawn." Tom grabbed the physical evidence from Welby's caches, along with supplies he'd prepared for this contingency. As they prepared to leave through the back door, he took one last look around the kitchen, where Anna had made breakfast every morning, where Sarah had done homework at the table, where their family had shared the ordinary moments that make life meaningful. "Dad." Sarah's voice was gentle but urgent. "We have to go." Tom nodded and followed his daughter into the darkness behind their house. As they crossed the fence into the forest, Tom heard the sound of car engines approaching from multiple directions. Cross's teams were moving with the precision of people who had eliminated inconvenient witnesses many times before. But this time was different. This time, they were hunting people who had Agent Welby's evidence, his tactical preparation, and most importantly, his unshakable belief that justice was worth any sacrifice. The forest was dark and cold, but Tom felt oddly calm as he and Sarah began their hike toward the ranger station. They were finally done running, done hiding, done hoping that somehow this nightmare would resolve itself peacefully. Helena Cross had made this personal when she threatened Sarah. She had escalated to violence when she'd ordered Tom's elimination. Now she would learn what Agent Marcus Welby had discovered 46 years ago, that some truths are too important to be buried, and some people are too determined to be intimidated. The reckoning that had waited nearly half a century was finally at hand, and Tom Granger, failed mechanic, widowed father, accidental inheritor of a federal agent's legacy, was about to discover whether ordinary people could still triumph over institutional corruption when they were willing to risk everything for justice. Behind them, the lights of their house disappeared into darkness. Ahead lay the ranger station, Senator Blackwood's office in Washington, and the final confrontation that would determine whether Marcus Welby's sacrifice had been in vain, or whether his faith in American justice would finally be vindicated. The evidence was secured, the truth was documented, and the time for hiding was over. Helena Cross had built her empire on the assumption that people would always choose safety over justice, compliance over courage. She was about to learn how wrong she had been. The evidence cache that Agent Welby had hidden at Copper Creek Mine was even more comprehensive than Tom had dared hope. Boxes of meticulously organized documents proved not just the Meridian Industries conspiracy, but connections to dozens of other criminal enterprises spanning decades. Financial records showed money laundering operations totaling over $500 million. Photographs documented meetings between Helena Cross and figures from organized crime families across the Midwest. Recorded conversations captured federal officials accepting bribes and agreeing to obstruct investigations. But most damning of all were Cross's own files, documents she had kept as insurance against her criminal partners. Agent Welby had somehow infiltrated her personal archives, copying evidence that Cross had been using for blackmail and protection. Tom and Sarah reached the abandoned mine entrance as dawn broke over the Montana wilderness. They had hiked through the night, following game trails and avoiding the roads where Cross's surveillance teams would be searching for them. "Dad, look at this," Sarah said, examining a series of photographs from Welby's cache. "These show Cross meeting with the same people over different decades. She's been running this operation for her entire career." Tom studied the images, recognizing faces he'd seen in news coverage of organized crime prosecutions. Helena Cross hadn't just facilitated one conspiracy. She had built a criminal empire that had operated continuously for nearly 50 years. "It's bigger than we imagined," Tom said. "Welby wasn't investigating corporate embezzlement. He was documenting the systematic corruption of American institutions. They photographed every document, uploaded copies to Sarah's encrypted cloud storage, and prepared the evidence packages that would be delivered to Senator Blackwood's office. But as they worked, Tom became aware of sounds that didn't belong in the wilderness: helicopters in the distance, vehicles on forest roads, the organized movement of a large-scale search operation. "They've found us," Sarah said, looking up from her laptop. Tom climbed to the mine entrance and surveyed the surrounding terrain. In the distance, he could see dust clouds from multiple vehicles converging on their location. Cross hadn't just sent a few associates to collect the evidence. She had mobilized what appeared to be a private army. "How much time do we need to finish the uploads?" Tom asked. "Another 20 minutes, maybe 30. The satellite connection is slow out here." Tom calculated distances and terrain, weighing their options. The mine offered defensive advantages, limited access points, multiple escape routes through abandoned tunnels, and the possibility of hiding the evidence even if they couldn't escape with it. "We make our stand here," Tom decided. "This is where Agent Welby left his legacy, and this is where we'll defend it." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. They had found more than enough evidence to destroy Helena Cross and her criminal network, but they had to survive long enough to deliver it to people who could act on it. Tom activated the mine's emergency beacon, a system that Agent Welby had installed as a fail-safe communication device. According to Welby's notes, the beacon would alert federal authorities to suspicious activity at the mine location. But given the extent of corruption that Welby had documented, Tom wasn't certain that federal response would be helpful rather than hostile. The first vehicles reached the base of the mountain as Sarah completed the evidence uploads. Tom watched through binoculars as armed men began establishing a perimeter around the mine entrance. 8 vehicles, maybe 30 people, Tom reported. "They're setting up for a siege, not a quick assault." "That means they want us alive," Sarah said. "They need to know what we've found and where we've hidden copies." Tom nodded grimly. Helena Cross would want to interrogate them before eliminating them, which meant they had time to prepare for what was coming. The mine tunnel system was extensive, dating back to the 1920s, when copper mining had been profitable in this region. Agent Welby had mapped the tunnels carefully, identifying escape routes and defensive positions that could be used if his cover was blown. Tom and Sarah positioned themselves in a chamber deep in the mine, surrounded by Welby's evidence caches and protected by narrow passages that would funnel any attackers into killing zones. They had limited ammunition, only what Tom had brought for wilderness protection, but they also had the advantages of superior position and detailed knowledge of the terrain. "Mr. Granger." Helena Cross's voice echoed from the mine entrance, amplified by some kind of electronic system. "I know you're in there. Let's discuss this like civilized people." Tom looked at Sarah, who shook her head firmly. They both understood that Cross's version of civilization involved murder and cover-ups. "You have something that belongs to me," Cross continued. "Agent Welby stole confidential documents before his unfortunate accident. Those documents need to be returned to their proper owners." Tom found Agent Welby's emergency communication system and activated it. The device was primitive by modern standards, but it had been designed to penetrate the interference that might block normal communications in remote locations. "This is Thomas Granger at Copper Creek Mine," Tom spoke into the device. "I am a civilian who has discovered evidence of federal crimes spanning multiple decades. I am currently under siege by armed individuals attempting to prevent this evidence from reaching appropriate authorities, requesting immediate federal assistance." The response came within minutes, but it wasn't what Tom had hoped to hear. "Mr. Granger, this is Agent Patricia Morrison with the FBI Great Falls Field Office. We've been monitoring your situation. Helena Cross has informed us that you're in possession of stolen classified materials and that you've made threats against federal officials. We need you to surrender yourself and the materials immediately." Tom's blood ran cold. Even the FBI response had been compromised, just as Agent Welby had suspected 46 years ago. Cross's influence extended into federal law enforcement, making it impossible to trust official channels. "The materials aren't stolen," Tom replied. "They're evidence left by FBI agent Marcus Welby, who was murdered in 1978 while investigating organized crime infiltration of federal agencies. Helena Cross ordered his death and has been covering it up ever since." There was a long pause before Agent Morrison responded. "Mr. Granger, there is no record of an Agent Marcus Welby. You need to surrender now before this situation escalates further." Tom turned off the communication device, understanding that they were truly on their own. Cross had managed to erase Welby's official existence, making it impossible to prove his federal authority through normal channels. "Dad, we have a problem," Sarah said, monitoring her laptop. "Someone's jamming our internet connection. The evidence upload stopped 5 minutes ago." Tom realized that Cross was systematically cutting off their options. No federal assistance, no way to complete the evidence transmission, and no escape route that wouldn't lead directly into the arms of her security teams. But Sarah had anticipated this possibility. "I set up a dead man's switch," she explained. "If I don't check in with the automated system every 6 hours, it will send everything we've already uploaded to journalists and congressional offices automatically." "How long until the next check-in?" 4 hours. If they want to stop the evidence from being released, they need to keep us alive until then." Tom felt a grim satisfaction. Sarah had bought them time and leverage, turning their desperate situation into a negotiating position. Helena Cross's voice echoed through the mine again. "Mr. Granger, I'm going to make this very simple. You have something I need, and I have resources you can't imagine. But I'm prepared to be reasonable. Bring me the evidence, and I'll ensure you and your daughter leave here safely." Tom picked up Agent Welby's megaphone and responded, "I have a counteroffer, Ms. Cross. You have 4 hours to withdraw your people and turn yourself in to federal authorities. After that, evidence of your criminal conspiracy gets delivered to every journalist and congressional investigator in Washington." Cross's laughter was cold and genuinely amused. "Mr. Granger, you still don't understand who you're dealing with. I've been protecting these interests since before your daughter was born. I've eliminated federal agents, senators, judges, and journalists. What makes you think you'll be any different?" "Because Agent Marcus Welby prepared for this exact scenario," Tom replied. "He knew you would try to cover up his murder, and he left evidence that proves your guilt beyond any doubt. The truth is going to come out, Ms. Cross. The only question is whether you'll be alive to face justice, or whether you'll join your victims." The mine fell silent for several minutes. Tom and Sarah used the time to prepare their defensive positions, checking ammunition and reviewing Welby's maps of the tunnel system. When Cross spoke again, her voice had lost its professional calm. "You have 1 hour to reconsider, Mr. Granger. After that, my people will come in and collect what they need. I suggest you use that time to think about your daughter's future." Numb. The mine's emergency beacon had been Agent Welby's most ingenious creation, a system that bypassed normal communication channels and transmitted directly to a network of federal investigators who had been working outside compromised official structure. Tom discovered the beacon's true purpose when Sarah's laptop received an encrypted message. "This is David Chen, Chief of Staff to Senator Patricia Blackwood. Agent Welby's beacon has been monitored for 46 years. Federal response teams are en route to your location. Hold position." "Dad, look at this," Sarah said, showing him additional messages flooding their secure connection. Journalists from the Washington Post, investigators from the Senate Judiciary Committee, FBI agents from offices across the country. Welby's beacon didn't just call for help, it activated a network that's been waiting decades for this moment. Tom felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. Agent Welby had anticipated that his evidence would eventually be discovered, and he had prepared a support network that could act when the time came. But Helena Cross wasn't finished. Her voice echoed through the mine with a new note of desperation. Mr. Granger, federal vehicles are approaching this location. That's unfortunate, because it means I can no longer guarantee your safety. My associates have orders to eliminate all witnesses if this situation isn't resolved quietly. Tom heard the sound of helicopter rotors approaching, but he couldn't tell whether they carried rescue or additional threat. Cross's influence in federal agencies meant that official response might be as dangerous as her private security teams. Sarah, stay behind the rocks and keep uploading everything we have. No matter what happens, that evidence has to reach the outside world. Sarah nodded, her fingers flying over the laptop keyboard as she transmitted Welby's files to the growing network of investigators and journalists who were receiving the beacon's signal. The first sounds of gunfire came from the mine entrance, not directed at Tom and Sarah, but between competing groups outside. Tom realized that federal agents and Cross's private security were engaged in a firefight, with his family caught in the middle. "This is Agent Patricia Morrison, FBI," came a voice over Welby's communication system. "Mr. Granger, we have federal agents securing the mine perimeter. Helena Cross and her associates are under arrest. You can come out safely." But Tom remembered Morrison's earlier communication, when she had claimed no record of Agent Welby existed. He couldn't trust that this wasn't another attempt to lure them into the open. "Prove it," Tom responded. "Tell me something that only legitimate federal investigators would know about Agent Marcus Welby." There was a pause, then a different voice came over the system. "Mr. Granger, this is David Chen from Senator Blackwood's office. Agent Welby's badge number was 2847. His final report identified you as the civilian who would eventually discover his evidence. He predicted that Helena Cross would try to eliminate you, just as she eliminated him." Tom felt tears in his eyes. Agent Welby had somehow known that a desperate father would eventually find his trail and follow it to its conclusion. The man had died, believing that someone like Tom would have the courage to see justice done. "Dad, the uploads are complete," Sarah announced. "Everything Welby gathered is now in the hands of investigators, journalists, and congressional staff members across the country. Even if Cross destroys the physical evidence, the digital copies will survive." Tom took Sarah's hand and began moving toward the mine entrance, following Agent Welby's mapped route to safety. As they emerged into daylight, Tom saw a scene that looked like a military operation. Federal agents had established a perimeter around Helena Cross's security teams, who were surrendering their weapons and submitting to arrest. Cross herself stood near a black SUV, her expensive suit torn and her perfectly styled hair disheveled. When she saw Tom and Sarah emerging from the mine, Cross's mask of professional composure finally slipped entirely. "You have no idea what you've done," she screamed. "The people I protect have resources you can't imagine. They'll hunt you down, eliminate you, destroy everyone you've ever cared about." David Chen approached Tom and Sarah, flanked by federal agents who Tom hoped were genuine rather than more of Cross's compromised contacts. "Mr. Granger, I'm David Chen. Senator Blackwood asked me to thank you personally for completing Agent Welby's mission. The evidence you've uncovered will result in prosecutions across multiple federal districts." Tom looked back at the mine entrance, thinking about the FBI agent who had died trying to expose the truth. "Agent Welby deserves the credit. I just followed his trail." Agent Welby believed that ordinary Americans would step up when their institutions failed them, Chen said. "You've proven he was right." As federal agents led Helena Cross away in handcuffs, she looked back at Tom with undiluted hatred. "This isn't over, Granger. You have no idea how deep this conspiracy goes. Arresting me won't stop anything." But Tom was no longer afraid of Helena Cross or her threats. Agent Welby's evidence was in the hands of people who could act on it, and the truth that had been buried for 46 years was finally going to see daylight. Sarah squeezed his hand as they watched Cross's convoy disappear down the mountain road. "Dad, what happens now?" Tom looked at his daughter, then at the mine where Agent Marcus Welby had hidden evidence that would finally deliver the justice he had died trying to achieve. "Now we go home," Tom said. "Agent Welby's work is done, and so is ours." But even as he spoke, Tom knew that their lives had been fundamentally changed by their journey through Marcus Welby's legacy. They had discovered that ordinary people could still triumph over institutional corruption, but only when they were willing to risk everything for the truth. The reckoning had finally come for Helena Cross and her criminal conspiracy, and it had been delivered by a failed mechanic and his 16-year-old daughter who had refused to let a federal agent's sacrifice be in vain. 6 months after Helena Cross was arrested at Copper Creek Mine, Tom Granger stood in his rebuilt garage, watching Sarah practice parallel parking in the new car they could finally afford. The federal government's reward for exposing the criminal conspiracy had been substantial, not the $74 million that Agent Marcus Welby had recovered, but enough to secure their future and honor the dreams that Anna had held for their family. The garage bustled with activity now. Tom had hired 2 full-time mechanics and purchased modern equipment that made the business profitable rather than merely sustainable. But the real change wasn't in the machinery or the financial security. It was in the knowledge that they had played a part in delivering justice that had been delayed for nearly half a century. Sarah looked up from her driving practice, her smile carrying the confidence that came from knowing she could handle whatever challenges life presented. Her college applications had been submitted to the best schools in the country, and her essay about following a federal agent's trail to justice had impressed admissions officers who understood the courage required to confront institutional corruption. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you're going to the dedication ceremony next week," Sarah called out. Tom nodded. The ceremony would honor Agent Marcus Welby, whose real identity had finally been acknowledged by the FBI. His name would be added to the memorial wall for agents killed in the line of duty, and his family, located after decades of believing he had simply disappeared, would finally have closure about his fate. Helena Cross's trial had been a sensation that exposed corruption, reaching the highest levels of corporate and government power. Dozens of officials had been indicted, criminal organizations had been dismantled, and reforms had been implemented to prevent the kind of systematic infiltration that Welby had died trying to expose. Cross herself had been sentenced to life in federal prison, her carefully constructed empire of blackmail and murder finally brought to justice. During the trial, she had maintained her arrogance until the moment when Agent Welby's recorded testimony was played in court. The dead man's voice, calm and professional even in the face of certain death, had finally broken through her composure. Tom still kept Agent Welby's compass on his workbench, its brass surface polished to a golden sheen. The inscription, "Truth will prevail," had proven prophetic, though it had taken longer than Welby could have imagined. David Chen visited occasionally, updating Tom and Sarah on the ongoing prosecutions and reforms that had resulted from Welby's evidence. The scope of the conspiracy had been even larger than they had initially understood, reaching into dozens of corporations and multiple federal agencies. "Agent Welby would be proud of what you accomplished," Chen had said during his most recent visit. He believed that ordinary Americans would step up when their institutions failed them. You proved he was right. But Tom knew that he and Sarah hadn't been ordinary Americans when they had made the choice to follow Welby's trail. They had been desperate people, with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from taking extraordinary risks. The personal letter that Agent Welby had left in his final cache had been addressed not to federal investigators or congressional committees, but to the person who would eventually discover his evidence. Tom kept it framed in his office, a reminder of the faith that a dying man had placed in the decency of strangers. "To whoever finds this evidence, you have chosen courage over safety, justice over comfort, truth over convenience." That choice honors the best traditions of American democracy and proves that our institutions, however corrupted, can still be redeemed by citizens willing to defend them. "I don't know who you are or what circumstances led you to follow my trail, but I know you are exactly the person this evidence was meant for." You have the strength to see justice done and the integrity to ensure that my sacrifice serves a purpose larger than revenge. Thank you for completing the mission I couldn't finish. Thank you for proving that truth will indeed prevail, even when it requires decades of patience and the courage of people I will never meet. With gratitude and respect, FBI Special Agent Marcus Welby, Badge 2847. Tom had read the letter hundreds of times, but it still moved him to tears. Agent Welby had died believing that someone would eventually care enough about justice to risk everything in its pursuit. The man had been right, but his faith had required 46 years to be vindicated. Sarah joined Tom in his office, carrying acceptance letters from 3 different universities. She had chosen the school that offered the best pre-law program, determined to build a career that would continue the fight for justice that had changed their lives. "Dad, I've been thinking about Agent Welby's legacy," she said. "Do you think he knew that finding his evidence would change us as much as it changed the system he was fighting?" Tom considered the question, remembering the fear and desperation that had driven him into the forest to search for salvageable car parts. That man felt like a stranger now, someone who had existed before he understood that ordinary people could still make extraordinary differences when they chose courage over comfort. "I think he hoped it would," Tom replied. Agent Welby believed that democracy depends on citizens who are willing to act when their institutions fail them. He left his evidence for people who would be changed by the experience of fighting for justice. Outside, the Montana wind carried the scent of pine trees and the promise of spring. Tom and Sarah had survived their journey through Marcus Welby's legacy, and they had emerged as different people, stronger, more confident, and more aware of their ability to influence the world around them. The garage that Anna had wanted Tom to expand was now thriving. Sarah's future was secure, her education funded by rewards that honored both her courage and her father's determination. The community that had watched them struggle was now proud to call them neighbors, understanding that heroism could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. But perhaps most importantly, Agent Marcus Welby's sacrifice had finally achieved its intended purpose. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and the corruption that had seemed insurmountable had been exposed and defeated by a desperate father and his remarkable daughter, who had refused to let a federal agent's death be in vain. Tom returned Agent Welby's compass to its place of honor on his workbench, its needle pointing true north as it had for 46 years. The inscription caught the afternoon light. "Truth will prevail." It had taken nearly half a century, but Marcus Welby had been right all along.